It's good. It's good.
You got it? Oh, yeah.
You want it or no?
Hey everybody, thanks so much for coming out. So before we get started, I do just want to really quickly have a big thanks to the space that we're in today, Starfish Mission. It's a really great organization, really great people, and yeah, they've made all this possible. So Matt's going to say a few words about it real quick, and then we'll get started.
Right? Oh, yeah.
He's got a mic.
Yeah, welcome everybody. I'm sure a lot of people have been here before. Starfish Mission, we're a blockchain community space. Tonight is really special for me because it's the first time the Bitcoin Social has been here.
Yeah.
When I got started in blockchain something like 3 years ago, I met a lot of great people through Travis's meetups, so it's great to kind of come full circle and start doing these here. And yeah, there are a lot of great people, I'm sure, in the audience. And yeah, I guess a little plug, if you're looking to be more involved in blockchain or what we're doing here, please come talk to me and let's figure out something that you can do. And with that, I'll open it up to the program. Thank you all for being here.
So today, the event, it's called Crypto Culture. We're kind of going into the memes and the history and the ideologies of Bitcoin in about 30 or so minutes. So I think we'll probably be able to cover everything. But if we leave anything out, maybe we can do a follow-up later. I did want to go ahead and just get started by just introducing myself. I'm Travis. I organize this meetup group. I'm going to be moderating during the panel event. We're going to have Arya come up in a moment, and he's going to tell us a little about himself, then perform. And then we'll go ahead and bring up Dan and Simone as well. So Arya, please. Get this one.
So first of all, thanks. I kind of last minute asked Arya if he would be interested in doing something a little crazy, coming out here and performing for everyone. We've never done a performance before one of our Bitcoin events. It's always kind of gone right into information and topics and speaking. But it's Bitcoin culture, so we're going to get a sample of it. Very cool. Bitcoin Daddy! Yeah, Greg! Well, let's go with that. Why don't you tell me a little bit about how you ended up here, who you are, and how you ended up being Coin Daddy?
Yeah, so I've been in Bitcoin for a long time. I've been in Bitcoin since 2013. I went through the same lull that everyone else did, and then last year, in 2017, around October, I was just on the lark and I decided to make some crypto music, like a Weird Al Yankovic style crypto parody songs. And I did a few of them and they got pretty popular, and through a series of events through Travis, I was featured in the New York Times for this crypto music. And that led to CNBC through Greg and Bloomberg and a few other places. And before I knew it, I became like the original Bitcoin meme rapper.
I think people were waiting for you.
I think the people didn't realize they needed it, but they needed it.
And that was exactly my reaction the first time I met you at El Rio. I was like, yes, exactly. It's exactly what I've been looking for.
Is the photo up there?
Oh, yeah.
So you guys can see, this is the costume that actually got...
This is a photo from New York Times. Could I get someone to help me with the slides? I didn't have my clicker. If somebody could just run the slide. Thanks, Alicia.
So basically, the New York Times photographer approached me and she just said, why are you dressed like that? And I just said, this is how people dress who own Bitcoin. And she said, fantastic. So here we are. So I bought the outfit from cheaphalloweencostumes.com for I think 50 or 60 bucks, and I lost it and I bought it. No, I paid in cash. Actually, really have held on to my Bitcoin for ever, to be honest.
You wouldn't be Coin Daddy otherwise.
I wouldn't be Coin Daddy.
Well, why don't you tell us what you're going to sing today?
I'm going to sing a song called I Just Hold. I'm sure if you guys know anything about 90s rap, you'll notice this beat. It's from Ludacris's I Got Hose, right? But that's inappropriate, so we say I Just Hold instead. So if we could play the song?
Yeah, let's get it going.
Awesome.
Matt? Yeah, Matt has it over here.
Yeah, just hold. I just hold and keep my storage cold. Storage cold. Hold. Hold and keep my storage cold. Storage cold. Now you thought I was just BTC and LTC, coin daddy's got it all. Even XRP, I'm the Jihan Wu-Tang, crypto shill man, flow trotting hold man, your favorite coin man.
ETH and NEO, coin daddy allocated before you know. REP.
Way to the ZEC, you can cap agent squad front of the SEC. So control your anxiety, get off the PC. But coin
Daddy collects all your USD. ETC, REP, THC, all I need.
check, coin market cap, put your longs on, got an ROI so high, as
Long as like REP to the BTG. God damn, it feels good to be me. I just hold.
I just hold and keep my storage cold. Storage cold. Come on! Hold. Hold and keep my storage cold. Storage cold. Not every day is a holding day, so stop the scams and put the coins away. Play video game. REP, BTG, 2CP, don't mess with me. You're checking all your bags, looks like you want to cry. I'm beating your ass like I dropped in GoldenEye. REP, BTG, XVG, 2EZ. I market make, market take, piling it up so high, waiting for the proof of stake. Conferences in Asia, Korea to Hong Kong, evangelizing product, call us Mongo's gone wrong. Man, I'm just chilling with a mouse and a smile. I just check up my DM, take me down in the line. Got my coins in a big ass set. I'm slinging these bags for a heart attack. Is it cause I like my girl a while? Is it cause I like decentral talk? Ooh, is it cause I like my handsome face? Handsome face? Is it cause I like my shilling ways? Shilling ways? Whatever it is, they love it and they just won't let me be. I handle my biz, don't scare me. I got boys at the SEC. Whenever I call, come running. They just give me that BTC. You know that I bought. Stop whining, or I'll call my Twitter on me. Just hold. I just hold and keep my storage cold. Storage cold. Come on! Hold. Hold and keep my storage cold. Storage cold. Everybody, you need to take the coins off of Coinbase, put it onto a ledger, put it onto a treasure, put it deep down into the ice, into the Antarctic bottom of the earth. Actually, it's really hot, so I'll put it there. All right, guys, thank you, Coin Daddy. Thank you. And I promise the studio recorded version is much better than the live recording. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Let's go ahead and bring Dan and Simone on.
Yeah! Dan and Simone!
I'll do the cable. All right, so why don't we go ahead and move up to the beginning of the slides. So before we get started, Dan, Simone, I just want you to take the opportunity to introduce yourselves, so everybody kind of who you are, and what we're going to talk, what you're going to bring to the discussion today. Dan, please.
Okay, so I'll get us started. Got involved in crypto back in 2012, 2013, and back in that day it was just Bitcoin. So actually I started in Bitcoin back in 2012, 2013. Built my first product called Zero Block, which is the Blockfolio equivalent. Back in 2013, I know not a lot of people were there back in that day. And that got acquired by blockchain.info. I came on board there as one of the first product managers. Then I went to go work at ChangeTip. ChangeTip did micropayments over social media. And then after that, took a little break and then came back to this space in 2017 to work on a product called Interchange, which is a portfolio management tool for institutional crypto traders. In other words, the mint.com for crypto hedge funds.
All right, Simone.
Hi, I'm Simone. That's my puppy, Lulu Bitcoin Multipass. Oh man, she was expensive. She was a whole Bitcoin.
No regrets?
No regrets, no regrets. Brings more joy than watching the little green or red ticker. Could ever. So I'm Simone. I've been in the crypto/Bitcoin ecosystem since 2011. Usually when I get to this point in the story, I call out George Burke and I'm like, just go talk to George because he knows what happened during that time period. Usually he's like the other OG in the room. And so I was running as CMO Tradehill, which was at the time the second largest Bitcoin merchant in the world, and we called it a merchant back then because we couldn't use the word exchange because we didn't fall under that regulatory purview. And eventually ended up becoming a co-founder of Bitcoin.com, which before Roger Ver owned the domain, we were a peer-to-peer mobile payment system. And so been around the block and been in the ecosystem for the last 8 years, and you can read the other stuff on my bio. Ended up working for Peter Thiel, ended up doing a bunch of stuff for SpaceX. I've been an investor now for the past 5 or 6 years in traditional venture capital, and over the past year have transitioned back into crypto because that's where my roots are.
And Tradehill was the first US exchange, right?
Yeah, well, we were actually
merchant?
Yeah, merchant.
Merchant, sorry, merchant, yes.
We were actually Chilean, if I'm not mistaken. And again, to try to skirt the regulatory environment in order for us to not be defined as an exchange, there were lots and lots of different things that we did to do that. One of those was to be based out of Chile.
That's 2011, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Long time ago.
Long time
Well,
ago.
since we're talking about then, let's just jump right into it. We have some slides to kind of run through. We're starting with history, and we were all kind of working on these before. So, yeah, cypherpunks. I actually didn't make that slide. Who did that one?
That was me.
All right, then Dan, how about you go for it?
You know, part of the agenda for today would be just to give you kind of that deep, rich history of why Bitcoin was created, who created it, and what group kind of created it, and that original culture. You know, overall, this is talking about the culture of Bitcoin in the early days and how that progressed through the years to become what we see now as the crypto space. And then to talk about some fun memes at the end, which are the kind of the glue or the bonding
memes on this thing.
to the right. And so the early days of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin, there's a group that predated Bitcoin called the cypherpunks, which were essentially a group of individuals that were very crypto-libertarian or crypto-anarchist, which they felt that cryptography would lead to advances in governance, money, and other forms of control over humans. And the early group there started with like Tim May and a few other, Nick Szabo. I don't know if anyone here has read The Origins of Money. A lot of, yeah. Satoshi. Some people consider him to be Satoshi. So there's Nick Szabo and a couple of these early guys, which the Bitcoin white paper cites. They're called cypherpunks. I don't know if you guys have any other additional color there, but essentially they're kind of super crypto-libertarians, very, very radical people that felt that freedom was like the ultimate sort of good.
Yeah, there's this like, the culture was kind of predicated very much on this like libertarian idealism and like value set. And what's really funny is like nowadays when you can like really separate out almost like who I believe to be more of like the real Bitcoin/crypto people in the ecosystem by like, you know, what their value set is, and usually that's like fairly libertarian. And like, I think one of the people who never gets a shout out when it comes to cypherpunks is Brennan Cohen, who, you know, created BitTorrent, and, you know, it's his underlying like capability, which, you know, very much Bitcoin is based off of.
And if you have a conversation with that guy, you know, he's like super libertarian. His value set aligns very much, and like now with like kind of how we view the world. And also he's here in Silicon Valley running Chia Coin.
Yeah, and Chia is a alternative proof of work coin that's out there, which has a really unique proof of work mechanism.
Yeah, those people have been on for a while, and I believe Bitcoin was originally shared on a cypherpunk mailing list as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, email's original distribution. This was before GitHub was around. So I think SourceForge was the original repository for the Bitcoin code.
Long, long ago, all the way back in 2008.
2009 was in the code. October 31st, 2008 was when the white paper was released. January 2009 is when the code was released.
Yeah, I actually heard about Bitcoin in 2009 through an NPR like podcast type thing, and it was basically really interesting because at the time they were talking about Second Life and how Linden dollars were like super great, but you couldn't actually use them for anything, and that Bitcoin could actually be the thing that brought Linden dollars out or a Linden dollar type capability out into the real world to actually purchase goods and services.
I got my first Bitcoin with Linden dollars.
Wow!
Yeah, really?
Oh my God, that's amazing.
It was the easiest way to do it that I could find.
How many people here
Involved sending identity to Mt. Gox and waiting a week? And
Wow, when was that?
I can't remember the exact year, but yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
When Mt. Gox was still a thing.
How many people here have heard of Linden dollars before today? Okay, pretty healthy amount.
Yeah.
How many people have heard about Bitcoin before today? Actually, no hands went up. I think in 2008 I mentioned because it's important to kind of understand the climate, that we were in at the time and what was happening, and we have this slide here around all that.
Yeah, and there was a quote from Reuters right around this time that I think is very applicable to why Bitcoin was started, and the quote is that people have lost faith in their Congress, their president, and corporations. And Bitcoin was launched 4 weeks after Lehman Brothers collapsed. This was the moment when a world that ran on faith lost all faith, to where institutions that required trust, there was none left, to where the government had to step in and bail everyone out. Which leads to, the reason why Bitcoin was started, and Satoshi highlighted this, was like the world is entirely based on trust, and this is a trustless system. So it was sort of, if you could imagine the seed of Bitcoin being planted in a season that was the perfect season to plant it. If he had planted it 2 years earlier, that would have been in a very prosperous period. And the message in the code of Bitcoin was planted right in the right moment to foster that growth and development of the Bitcoin ecosystem.
And we have the white paper come out. Oh, can we go back? There we go. Yeah, so the white paper came out October 28, and then next slide. Or 2008, and then it just said the code started separately. There was the Genesis block in January, and there's even a quote right in there, and that's the one you just mentioned.
Yeah, and Satoshi used this quote as a proof of no pre-mine, which meant that he did not start mining Bitcoins before anyone else could. He released the code and everyone could mine it at the same time. And the pre-mine message that he included to prove that no pre-mine was a headline from the Times. UK Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. And I think that message really resonates clearly as to why it was planted, why now. Satoshi has mentioned in his Bitcoin Talk forum post that he had created Bitcoin 2 years earlier. So he was really waiting for the right moment to plant that seed.
Okay, before we go back to the two pizzas thing, wait, when did two pizzas happen?
2010, May
2010. Okay. Then my story comes a little bit after that. Cool.
Let's talk about some pizza.
Yeah, let's talk about
So then
pizza.
for 2 years, nothing happened, it seems, or for a year, nothing happened, and then pizza?
Well, I mean, stuff happened. People got really into it, right? There were miners all over the place, and I don't know how many of those people held on to their coins. I hope a lot.
Yeah, if we look at transaction history and if those early coins have moved, almost none of them have. Bitcoin was highly experimental. Bitcoin didn't have value until Pizza Day, May 2010, a year and a half after it was launched. And in fact, the first transaction of any value recorded for Bitcoin was 10,000 Bitcoins for two pizzas, around $40 or $20.
Yeah, it was about $41 of Bitcoin transaction that happened for about $25 worth of pizza. Now, a lot of people kind of, look at what happened here and say oh my God, how many millions of dollars is that worth today?
63 million.
So $63 million of the value of Bitcoin today. But here's the thing that we have to recognize. value is what you denote value as. And so if at the time you believed that what you were getting, for instance, 2 pizzas, was worth more or equal to the amount of Bitcoin that you were transacting with, then that's the value of the Bitcoin at the time. And so like the guy, whatever his name was,
Laszlo or something?
Laszlo got the exact value that he ascribed and other people at the time ascribed to Bitcoin. And like, I'm sure it was worth quite a bit more than what, you know, he essentially paid for it because he was a miner and it was just like use of electricity and like a little bit of compute and that's it. So like, you know, I don't think he begrudges the fact that he spent 10,000, you know, BTC on two pizzas, and I don't think that anyone else should either.
Well, most miners at the time, as Dan said, the coins haven't moved, and what you mean by that is that the coins were lost, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's highly likely Satoshi didn't even keep his private key. Like, it's highly likely Satoshi burned his private key.
Or people they get a new computer, they throw the hard drive away, it wasn't worth anything.
Well, yeah. We've got a friend in common who told me a story one time where he or she had a few hundred Bitcoin on a hard drive. And since it was worth so little, they needed to reformat the hard drive for some reason, and they didn't bother to sync the Bitcoin QT client and then send all the Bitcoin. So they just wrote over hundreds and hundreds of Bitcoins. You know, value is only what everyone else believes it is, and it truly wasn't worth much at that time.
Yeah, we could never predict. Look, at the time, 2011, 2013, we could never predict, like we hoped, but that the environment that exists today, even though there's a lot of people who are just like, oh God, Bitcoin's down, like for us who've been in the ecosystem for a while, like we could have never predicted that this would happen. That you'd have like all of these alts, that you'd have so many protocols, so many platforms, so much value seeping into the system. It's just like, it's phenomenal. And like, to me, it would have taken, you know, my prediction was it was at least 20 years out, not, you know, 5 years.
Yeah, the joke is Bitcoin crashes back down to $6,500. You know, and if you were early, I mean, we would have lost our minds if you had told us that it would have gone to 6,500. It would have been, you know, we landed on the moon. That would have been our moon.
Yeah, I mean, like we were just joking earlier today that, you know, after, like for me, after Bitcoin reached kind of like $30, I was like, oh man, it's way too expensive. Like, fuck this shit. You know, like, cause I'm gonna wait till it crashes again. And you know, after it reached $30-something, the second time around in 2012, it actually never, I don't think it bottomed out that far again. And so, you know, like I kept missing opportunities because like, you know, in retrospect to me, it's missing opportunities, but you know, at the time it was like, dude, like, this is like, it's hockey sticking too quickly, like, this is never gonna actually, like, you know, pan out, like, you know, for the next couple of years, why would I spend this amount of capital? You know, I first bought Bitcoin in at 3, so, yeah.
And I think it's whenever it broke dollar parity, right? Because we subjectively apply that dollar value, that medium of exchange, that unit of account, that the US dollar currency, and we think that anything above that is expensive because most people don't do the mental gymnastics of multiplying that by the circulating supply or by the total issuance. So.
Yeah, but I will tell you a secret. I do have a buy order in for 4,500. So at this point.
I'm the buyer of last resort. Some interesting things I pulled up here that not a lot of people probably know about. Everyone knows about Silk Road. So that's what kind of
Anybody here not know about Silk Road? Okay. Yeah, I think that's definitely a safe bet.
Yeah, so Silk Road, I think everyone knows the story behind there. It's an online emporium to buy drugs. Some of the other things that not a lot of people know of are like Liberty Reserve. So that's the Tether equivalent of, I think, 2012 to 2013. Mm-hmm. Tether equivalent to where they issued a digital representation of $1.
Was it Costa Rica or something?
Yeah, and they were based in Costa Rica or something like that. You know, at the time, Bitcoin was being compared to Liberty Reserve. It was Liberty Reserve and Bitcoin as digital currencies. And
there was also something called e-gold. It was like some guy in Florida had a bunch of gold in his basement, and he issued tokens representing that gold.
Yeah, I think if you were comparing it to Liberty Reserve, you were like a little bit cooler, and like basically 99% of the population was like, Bitcoin's nothing more than e-gold, and like literally that's all we would talk about was like, oh, debit cards for e-gold.
And for me, I moved out to San Francisco January 2013 and started to go to the Bitcoin meetups, which was hosted by your former coworkers at Tradehill, Jared Kenna, which he's on this panel over here with Roger Ver and Brian Armstrong from Coinbase.
All the way to that way.
Yeah, all the way to the right. So what's funny is the upper left-hand corner, which doesn't really show up on this screen, May 2013 in San Jose, Brian Armstrong was the only guy manning the booth. And they had printed out the Coinbase logo on like a 8.5 by 11 and taped it to the top of their booth. And if anyone wants to, we'll post a YouTube video where I found this.
Yeah, I'm going to put the slides up after, because I know on the live stream they might be a little blurry with the light differences. So yeah, we'll post the slides, we can post the links. We found a lot of stuff when we went kind of, dumpster diving for memes and history. I like that one though. Yeah, Brian Armstrong, the only person manning the Coinbase booth, and everyone here I'm sure has a Coinbase account.
I think this was before Olaf. I forget when they hired Olaf, but long time ago.
Kind of talking about this. Yes, then over the next year it continued to grow. People got excited, and then Mt. Gox happened.
So there was only 2 major exchanges at the time. Coinbase was not an exchange. They placed orders on Bitstamp. Luckily they did not place orders on Mt. Gox, because we would be in a much different world today if that was the case. But there was a lot of building going on in 2013. That's when it kind of really entered the mainstream consciousness.
When was Tradehill going?
So Tradehill 1.0 was going in 2011 up until about, okay, so feasibly up until about September of 2011. Okay, so here's the oft not told story. What most people don't know is a lot of collapse happened in 2011 around September, around crypto companies and Bitcoin companies because of Occupy Wall Street. Like almost nobody talks about this, but Occupy Wall Street was what shone a light on Bitcoin at all when it came to federal agencies and federal regulation. And because could not fit the definitions of whatever it was that we were doing, and we were so ill-defined as being people who used Bitcoin, as people who were transacting in who knows what kind of value. Was it money? What was it? And as like people who are running exchanges, and there were like several other definitions we biffed at. Occupy Wall Street I blame kind of for totally fucking us over for a little while. So that was 2011.
WikiLeaks had a similar effect as well, right?
I'm sorry, what?
WikiLeaks had a similar effect?
WikiLeaks too, yeah. And I think it was, what was it? Like, I just saw this like a couple of days ago. Julian Assange said something to the effect of like, Bitcoin was the real Occupy Wall Street. And so that just kind of leads into why Bitcoin became so popular when it did in 2011, and when Bitcoin kind of collapsed. It took until 2013 for it to kind of rise from the ashes again.
And we've seen these waves of adoption, which we'll get to a little bit later in terms of where we're at now. Because I know a lot of people are going through this bear market and wondering, when does this end? Where are we now? Going back into the past.
People bought at 20K and are wondering if it's ever going to go back, and
yeah,
a little sad.
Providing a little bit of context here when
we're all here for each other.
Yeah, there's free alcohol in the back for anyone really having a tough time, but it's never been stronger than it ever has. Now is the strongest it's ever been, and that's why we're kind of like reminiscing on how fragile and small and tiny that ecosystem was and where it came from.
Yeah, I mean, and to give you a little bit of like context for like your $20,000 Bitcoin sadness, in 2011, the mathematician team, kind of like the co-founders who ended up becoming the co-founders of Bitcoin.com, we all sat around for like 2 days and actually worked out that we thought that Bitcoin would certainly be worth about $10,000 a coin within like I think it was a 7 to 8 year period, but like ultimately Bitcoin would reach a $250,000 mark. Way before Tim Draper made that claim, by the way, and we had like actual math behind it. So yeah, don't worry, you're good.
And to zoom forward here, the big collapse that everyone knows about, because Simone's been there for a long time, but the 2013 one, that's the big one. And there's a bunch of terminologies. You got goxed. A lot of people had money in Mt. Gox.
This kind of goes to show you're saying about how fragile the ecosystem was at the time. This one exchange, this one point of failure went down. When you to tell the story of what happened there?
Yeah, so it had 90% of trading volume too. It was extremely fortunate that Coinbase decided to work with Bitstamp instead of Mt. Gox. Otherwise, we may not be here today. With Mt. Gox, what had happened is they had gotten hacked years prior, and they had a hole. They had X amounts of Bitcoins, I think it was in the hundreds of thousands, that they did not have. So Mark Karpelès, the CEO, felt that he could plug that hole given that the value stayed constant. If the value had stayed constant, he would have made that money back in trading fees and been able to have plugged that hole. But the price moved exponentially, 100x, and it made the hole 100x larger. And he tried to keep going until it eventually all became unraveled when he wasn't able to match all the withdrawals necessary for customers.
The definition of a giant house of cards.
Essentially, yeah. To make kind of a little bit of a fun note, he took an interview on a exercise ball, which in the upper left-hand corner, which a lot of people really didn't like in the space at the time because it made us look pretty amateur. Because I think that was with like Reuters or Bloomberg or something, and it looked pretty silly. He was also a convicted felon in France for fraud.
It's kind of a shame the headlines cutting off the two protesters' heads down there. One of them's wearing Google Glass, which I also really liked seeing.
Brings you back?
Yeah, he was the guy on the right.
And a lot of people got stuck because they saw that there was a spread that Bitcoins on Mt. Gox were more expensive. So like $100 more expensive than on Bitstamp. So they'd send their money to Mt. Gox hoping they could sell those Bitcoins for dollars and run like arbitrage. And that was kind of like a honeypot that sucked a lot of people in.
And it's actually our first meme there, yeah.
Yeah, you got
Chuck
Goxed.
Norris could get his Bitcoins out. Next slide. Yeah, so obviously anybody who's been around even just recently, you've seen the giant crash bubble that we've had, but this has happened before. Yeah, Ari, you
gotta mention Roger Beard, how he said everything was there.
Oh.
Yeah, so on the last slide, we've got a picture of Roger, and he got on YouTube, and he said, Mt. Gox is perfectly solvent, don't worry about your money, it's all there, and
trust, right?
Yeah.
Just like the 2008 trust.
And crypto is all about don't trust, verify, which that proves that point. Early hodlers got burned really badly over and over and over again. And that's where you see those kind of early memes form around hodling and around kind of that cypherpunk ideology of being really libertarian.
And we'll get into hodling later. Next. Oh yeah, here we are. So the big bubble, yeah.
Yeah, does anyone recognize the name Purecoin?
Oh my God.
Or NovaCoin? These were some of the...
Just for the live stream, not a lot of hands are going
These
up.
were the top 5 cryptocurrencies in 2014.
But where's Ethereum?
Ethereum hadn't launched yet.
They hadn't launched it, man.
Yeah.
So we got Litecoin number 2. As it should be.
You got Primecoin with a $1.6 million market cap.
Primecoin's still around. You can buy Primecoin today.
Okay, so honestly, most of us who were in the ecosystem before all of these coins launched, we were like, fuck this shit. Oh, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Who are these guys? Like Litecoin, whatever.
Yeah, that was the big thing too. Just the idea of any other coins was kind of took a while for people to get used to because it was just Bitcoin.
Oh yeah, because we used to sit here and say oh, they're just trying to catch up to the rest of us. They just
They want to invent their own bullshit, and then and who knows what the heck they're solving and why they exist, and who are these guys?
The most convincing argument I heard
I
was...
will defend Primecoin here, okay guys? Primecoin was going to be the next Bitcoin, and here's why. Bitcoin mining is wasteful. I'm sure you've all heard that narrative. I don't actually believe this, but this is the Primecoin narrative that I'm giving you.
What do we have to or the electricity of Denmark now or something? Or
Something like
some small
that.
European country. It always keeps getting a bigger country every couple of months.
If you want to read more about it, I wrote something called Proof of Work is Efficient, if you'd like to check it out. But with Primecoin, what was cool is that it found prime numbers. I actually mined some Primecoin out of curiosity.
Cunningham chains.
I mined a whole block. I mined a whole block of Primecoins.
How long did it take you?
I mined on the first day. So I think in the first couple hours I mined one of those blocks. It's the only mining I've ever done, which is kind of fun.
And Litecoin told everyone that the whole thing there was to test out new features that would then later on make it into Bitcoin.
So there were script miners too, right?
Yeah, we're trying out kind of mining. A lot of the coins, they kind of existed in service of Bitcoin. The idea would be like, we are going to do something to help Bitcoin, and then eventually Bitcoin will bring that feature in. And that was the argument. Now the argument is they stand on their own. So that's been a big shift.
And you can think about it as a Cambrian explosion of different life forms. Bitcoin being one of the first life forms, and these being different species that kind of erupted and evolved and had different characteristics or different traits. Some had feathers, some didn't, some had wings, etc.
So people often ask me if is a maximalist question coming up or slide?
I think we're getting close.
Okay, cool. Okay. Yeah, so people often ask, if I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, and like, yeah, totally, I was. But here's the thing, I missed out on Ethereum because I had an email from one of the people who was running the TL20 under 20. And they asked me if I was willing to help somebody out who had already, I think he'd graduated the class already, and whether I was willing to help out this person who had invented ostensibly Bitcoin 2.0. And my reply was, no, Bitcoin's already solved. We don't need another one, I'm busy. Yeah.
Vitalik makes it into a few of the memes later on.
Okay, yeah, so that kind of answers the question, am I still a maximalist? No, absolutely not. Dan has what was your word for maximalism?
Minimalism.
Minimalism. So I'm a Bitcoin minimalist, but also I think that taking, I didn't really look at any of the earlier attempts at altcoins very closely, but after I realized what a bungle or whatever it's called that I made with Vitalik, I decided that I was never ever going to do that again.
Well, in your defense, in 2014, most people haven't heard of any of those that we showed in the top 5. So when Ethereum
Most people haven't heard of Bitcoin.
True. Yeah, and no one raised their hand for Bitcoin, so that's a good point.
Who are these guys?
Are we in the right room?
Is there anybody here who does not have Bitcoin? That's always a fun question. Okay. All right, no hands.
Good offset.
Oh, that's true, yeah. Good offset.
So as you saw in 2014, there was a plethora of new altcoins. So when Ethereum came around in 2015, people were skeptical. We had seen hundreds and hundreds of altcoins. So in retrospect, it seems pretty linear as to this value must have been easy to see. Oh, Ethereum and Vitalik, this must happen. But as Simone talked about, it wasn't that all apparent. This was one of many, many altcoins in a sea of altcoins.
Yeah, we started seeing some other projects as well. There was a lot of VC investment started happening. We say a lot back then. Of course, now it's quite small by comparison. Simone, I know you have remember the numbers or something on what kind of money was invested back then?
I don't have the exact numbers, but I remember talking to some of the guys at Founders, and by then I think I was no longer working with Peter. This is 2015. Yeah, I was no longer working with Peter. Because I had already kind of left Mithril, which was his investment firm, and so I tried to get the guys over there to look at the crypto ecosystem, but it was too early stage for them. And for Founders Fund and a couple of other of the funds that were in the ecosystem, crypto was still pretty interesting, but a lot of those guys still had PTSD.
There was immense struggle for early crypto startups to get funding because they had to play an educational role with the VCs. And in early 2013, when I got involved, there was only 15 people at the Bitcoin meetup. That's it.
Yeah.
And there was no VCs.
And the only VCs.
A lot of those people were there to learn what Bitcoin was.
Yeah. And the only VCs who actually truly got it were not interested necessarily in getting into the space because they had been affiliated with PayPal, which was supposed to be a cryptocurrency back in the day, and they got burnt massively. I know the story around the $1.5 billion sale to eBay, sounds amazing, but it was actually a really harrowing time for those guys, and they just did not want to come up against the exact same issues that they had with PayPal when it came to dealing with crypto. Yeah. But I think that's around the time that BitPay got an investment, right? Like a couple $1 million from founders, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, 2012, 2013.
Was it 13? Oh my god, my time.
Well, we don't.
BitPay tested that big idea. They were saying we need merchant adoption, right? That's what's going to make Bitcoin take off. Merchant adoption, merchant adoption. BitPay tested the crap out of that theory. They did a great job with that.
If we go 2 slides back,
Yeah.
we're kind of jumping back and forth here. There we go. So,
We're still talking about ICOs.
in 2013 to 2015, the big narrative was let's get more people to use it. And not a lot of people had read Nexavo or really read kind of the original post about Bitcoin or really thought much about what is money. Is it a store of value? Is it a medium of exchange? Or is it a unit of account? And so immediately most people leap to it's a medium of exchange because that's how they use their currency. Cryptocurrency is a misnomer. It really should be more like crypto or e-gold or gold 2.0 because as what we call currency, it's not super useful. As you can see in 2013 and 2015, you got a bunch of different merchants to adopt it. Really big names like you got Microsoft on there, Tiger Direct, Overstock. I'm pretty sure I bought like a computer monitor for the equivalent of $2 million or something. You know, we wanted to use it. We felt like this was going to convince people that they should hodl it as well, which we found out wasn't really true.
I mean, like the big kind of like, what is it called? Like the big barrier to entry almost seemed like once you can buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin, we've made it.
And then the coffee thing came up later with the fork as well. It's sort of, because using it for payments, right? Using it to buy things. The only time that ever really happened was Silk Road.
Right, the UX hurdles, the volatility in the price, the fees, the pain of using a wallet, people would only jump over those to do very, very specific things.
Credit cards work great, PayPal works great, we got Venmo now, all these things work great.
Cheaper, faster, and easier to use.
Your story about the monitor, I know someone, he spent like, at today's price is like $1.5 million on LSD.
Oh.
I mean, I know some people like that.
Yeah, because the people were using it on Silk Road, but the idea of merchant adoption, we tried it and it just didn't go anywhere, and now none of these people are taking it anymore.
And that's where we'll loop around to this conversation again when it comes to a big block versus small block, kind of the fork in the road.
A lot of people come up to a lot at the events and say, like, why can't I buy and sell things with Bitcoin? Why can't I use it online? Why can't I use it at the store? And I think it's just that's something that we've had to learn. We called it cryptocurrency. That's what it was called. People thought it would be a currency, but it's kind of now maybe more of an asset, more of a commodity like steel or gold.
Crypto gold.
Yeah. Around the same time, people started getting really interested in who Satoshi was.
Who is Satoshi?
Who is Satoshi Nakamoto? Who has a theory as to who Satoshi Nakamoto is? Yeah.
Who thinks it's actually a guy named Satoshi Nakamoto? No one, because you're not.
Newsweek thought it was a guy. Newsweek thought it was a guy literally named Satoshi Nakamoto.
It's like, so it was Leah Goodwin from Newsweek, and she was like, someone told me John Doe created something. I'm going to go find someone named John Doe. Yeah, completely asinine.
He's a nice guy. He likes trains.
Yeah, this old
He
Asian
came out
guy.
for one of our events once. It's the meme right there in the middle, the Asian gentleman with the face. He came to our Bitcoin art show, and everybody wanted a picture taken with him. He was wearing an auger shirt because someone gave him an auger shirt. He had no idea what it was, and Auger was like, like on Twitter, like, this is so amazing. Because there's like 20 pictures of people with their arm around Satoshi while he's wearing this auger shirt.
I feel bad for this confused old man who was just kind of.
He woke up one day and there was a cult in the Bay Area that worshipped him.
He's like, what the hell is Bitcoin?
On camera, he called it Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. Oh yeah.
And somebody made Bitcoin after that. Yes.
Yeah, they were like, did you create Bitcoin? And he's like, puts on his glasses, he's like, Bitcoin?
I mean, there's at least one thing that you can never get upset with the crypto community for. It's like we definitely have a sense of humor.
So we'll get a little bit more fun from here. We've been kind of deep down the cyberpunk rabbit hole. But then you've got the wonderful Craig Wright.
Yes, this is why I like.
Oh, that guy.
This is why and Satoshi Nakamoto, you call him Dorian. It's maybe a little easier. This is why I like Dorian, because Dorian never asked for it. He's a nice guy. But Craig showed up and he tried to convince people.
Well, if you're Satoshi, you got to come in with that wheelbarrow full of PhDs. That's how you prove it. So he actually did that at a conference. He had a wheelbarrow full of his PhDs. As a,
I encourage you to look up Craig Wright. He's a unifier because all the disagreements we have, big blocks, little blocks, altcoins, Bitcoin. Pretty much everybody doesn't like Craig Wright.
everyone is Satoshi except for Craig Wright.
I think it was about a year that I kind of threw in the towel for a while. I was like, fuck this. Who are these people?
And this is just a handful of names. There's David Kleinman. There's the Zabo theory, Al Finney. There was a new one I saw recently. It's like kind of like Bitcoin Fanfiction. Kind of you guys name now, Peter Wilson or something, or Phil Wilson. Yeah, I like that one too.
That was the brilliance behind Satoshi. Is he knew that when you read a book, you assign your own narrative, you assign the look and feel for the characters. That's why the books are better than the movies, because you come up with the narrative. And that's where Satoshi being anonymous allowed you to impress upon that individual your own narrative of who they should be. Which makes all of this the more hilarious, because then there's all these random people.
Oh, this was perfect. We were mentioning like the whole coffee thing and the kind of people were trying to figure out what Bitcoin was for, and they're this feeling it was really more like an ideological war between. Maybe you guys can explain the sides.
Yeah, so a lot of the early people in crypto, including Roger Ver, whom he bought my company. He was a majority stakeholder of blockchain. And he's the one who reached out to purchase my company back in 2013. I spent a lot of time with him. I think he's a nice person generally before all this happened. And I think what had happened was that Bitcoin to him, he was Bitcoin Jesus. And he got that term because he handed out free Bitcoin to everyone. And so for him, his entire persona was based on handing out free Bitcoin and using it in transactions and pestering restaurant owners. Every time we would go to a restaurant.
A lot of early education, he definitely taught a lot about Bitcoin early on.
Yes, and he tried to impress upon everyone why Bitcoin was important, and I admire him for that. And I think what had happened is when he had to face the cold hard facts that Bitcoin isn't that useful to pay for coffee, it kind of broke him. And he really wanted to look at a way to where he could harness that original vision that he had been pitching for almost 3-4 years. He's been pitching that same vision to everyone he met for 3 to 4 years, so that for the community to tell him that he's wrong, that hey, it's small blocks, that this is more of a bit gold or a crypto gold.
Maybe we should get into the whole small block, big block. Like we keep using this term, and the whole point of this event is to teach people all these terms. We've been too afraid to ask what these things mean.
I guess I'll take this. So small block is not not raising the block size limit by a lot.
Status quo, the way Bitcoin is right now. It's called a small block.
Right, maintaining its decentralization, maintaining its sovereign level resistance. The other camp felt that Bitcoin's main use was in payments. That in order to scale to be the Visa, to be the MasterCard, you had to go, remove that block size limit to allow all these transactions to happen cheaply. But they really fail to recognize human behavior. Why does someone want to use a cryptocurrency to pay for something? Is it cheaper, faster, or easier to use? And it's none of the three. And so the camps were divided. Bitcoin Cash became the big block camp. They believed that Bitcoin was good for coffee and payments. Small block camp felt that it was better used as a settlement mechanism or a crypto gold. And that's what we call Bitcoin today.
Yeah, so there's kind of there was two ideologies, and they ended up splitting into two separate coins, which I actually kind of consider kind of healthy, because if you do believe in one or the other, you're free then to switch to it. Let's do the next slide then. Yeah. Oh, did anybody have any? It was a really big thing that happened. I mean, we're kind of like saying, oh yeah, it's no big deal. But at the time, we were afraid. I mean, the miners were on their side, the devs were being smeared. It was very scary. Is this going to become the new Bitcoin? Are they going to take Bitcoin from us, from the different ideological group?
And that's where you see
like a hijack.
Yeah, that's where you see the Bitcoin users rise up, and UASF, which was that they rose up and said, no, we don't want to use this for payments. We bought into this because we thought it was going to be crypto gold, an unseizable asset. And that's where you see when the miners and the businesses tried to push their agenda, the people rose up. So Bitcoin isn't controlled by miners. Bitcoin is controlled by users or people who run full nodes. It's really controlled by the people.
This was a really big kind of cultural event, so if there's anybody who has any questions, I definitely want to know. Yeah.
I think it's important worth mentioning the New York Agreement as well, and what happened there, and how people's opinions were kind of like different.
there was sort of a backdoor agreement that happened where all the businesses got together and had come up with that scaling solution without a lot of input from the community. So that wasn't really looked highly upon by the users of Bitcoin.
And right there.
Yeah, so I'm a merchant myself. I have a brick-and-mortar store, and I remember when all of these companies started accepting Bitcoin, and it was great.
It was exciting.
I'm sorry.
It was exciting.
It was very, very exciting, and and so now a lot of merchants, I can't accept Bitcoin. If I have to refund somebody Bitcoin, how can I pay $50 in fees? And so for me, I feel like Bitcoin is useless to me. I consider myself a Bitcoin maximalist. I feel like Bitcoin can be for the world. Maybe it's not useful for here in America. Countries like Venezuela, countries like Zimbabwe, they need fees to be a fraction of a penny. And obviously, if we understand economics, the only reason why fees got up is because of the block size being limited. I feel like we're doubting ourselves if we feel like Bitcoin can't scale. We are entrepreneurs. Miners, they can create new technologies. They can create the better hard drives. They can beat Seagate. They can beat SandGate. They can beat Tesla. They can create better solar panels. They can create the new technologies that the rest of the world can use, which is why proof of work is the best there is. So why are we doubting ourselves? Why do we feel like we should limit and cap ourselves when we can do all of this at a fraction of a penny so we can use it around the world?
So everything in life is about a trade-off. There is no free lunch. There is no use of any scarce resource in the universe that does not require something else that you traded for it. There's only a finite amount of energy and matter and information in our universe. And when you do something, you translate one piece of that to another, and you're trading something for something else. And with the small block debate, they wanted to trade immutability, uncensorable transactions, and the essentially rising up and saying no to business interests in order to protect that immutable settlement layer rather than give in and trade off the block size limit for cheaper transactions. And I think that's a pretty distilled version of what happened. Because with the cheaper transactions, if you increase the block size limit, many nodes would go offline. And those are the full nodes are what propagate Bitcoin transactions. And if there's less and less of those, that means that it can be more easily corrupted and eventually swayed over to one side or the other, or aka decreasing the decentralization of Bitcoin.
I hope you don't mind answering. I think it's a fallacy to believe that nodes actually contribute to the entire system. It's the miners that wouldn't do anything. By the time the nodes get any type of transaction, they don't have the best equipment. They got low latency. They're regular people like you and I. But the miners, they have the best equipment. They're propagating the transactions right away. By the time the node knows about it, all the miners have already agreed upon the transaction. The nodes are waiting behind anyway.
The miners mining the blocks, they don't propagate the transaction. They can run their own full node to propagate the transaction, but in the Bitcoin network,
it's in the miners' best interest to propagate blocks. The reason is because they want their block to be found first. As soon as they find a block, they are propagating all the miners are connected. It's perfect. They're all connected to each other. As soon as they find a block, they're sending it off to all the other miners because they want them to validate the block so that way they can start working on the next block.
So we actually did a whole event about this. I encourage you to watch it. It's on the meetup. We live stream all of our events. If you go to the World Crypto Network San Francisco Bitcoin playlist, it was called What the Fork. And it was around this was happening, it was like August or something a year ago, or yeah. And I unfortunately we don't have time to go into it too much more. I'd like to move on to the next thing.
happy to discuss after.
Yeah, and of course, yeah, we'll talk some more later. All right, so
blockchain, not Bitcoin. This is when all the suits came in, and that's why I got the whole string of dudes in suits, mainly dudes too, but. You know, it was a lot of guys in suits. The idea that let's harness this new technology called blockchain and apply it to everything in a private ledger. Whereas now we've kind of seen that swung to more public ledgers.
Next slide. You don't really hear the blockchain, not Bitcoin thing as much anymore.
Oh God.
ICOs. So we're going to give like the worst coverage of ICOs ever to be really short, but it's a thing, it happened, and it's still happening. We definitely need to talk about it.
I think it's pretty fresh in everyone's memory what ICOs are.
Yeah. I don't know, Simone, do you have any comments?
Okay, so this is about when I came back into the ecosystem, because while everyone else was like doing the Bcash battle, I was like, I'm just going to invest in real world technology. And so that's what I ended up doing more industrial and infrastructure stuff. And then all of a sudden, like, all these ICO things started coming out, and the thing that got me super interested was like several of my friends started doing ICOs, and so Tezos was like one of the first that was like super well known. And I guess there were a few before then, but yeah, so that was that's when I kind of came back into the ecosystem in terms of like personal investments and that kind of thing. So ostensibly, the ICO was supposed to be this like awesome mechanism for people who wanted to create technology to kind of skirt the weirdness that is venture capital investment, because obviously VC investment did not work out so well for the preceding several years. Like back in my day, $50,000 was a lot to get from a VC.
And people were scarred by that experience.
Oh, most certainly.
I'm sure Vitalik probably went around and talked to VCs.
Oh, most certainly, yeah. I mean, and so even like the Hashgraph guys, who came up, like they also were getting turned away from VCs, right? So like everyone turned away from VCs, and so this like the concept of the ICO was born through
Crowdfunding.
Yeah, it was crowdfunding.
I think it's all pretty fresh for us what ICOs are.
Next slide.
We'll quickly cover some dank memes.
I think we all waiting for. All right.
Well, I mean, I really came here for the memes. Yeah. Right, that's what this place is really about.
We had to put all that stuff in the beginning because if we did the memes first, everybody would leave. So now we can have some fun. All right, let's do this.
Okay, let's see what I actually remember. This is going to be really great.
This is your meme page.
Oh my god.
Moon.
So Bitcoin to the moon, obviously, like I'm a space person. My partner is this like former SpaceX. Back in my day, like in 2011, like I would be like underneath my desk making phone calls to him. I was in rocket space over here in San Francisco, working on Bitcoin.com, and then he would be out in Florida actually working on the SpaceX rocket, like hanging from the rafters. And I would be like, I hope I don't go to jail. And he's like, don't go to jail. And so that was like really formative, because when the Bitcoin to the moon meme came out, secretly we were all like, yeah, Bitcoin to the moon is cool, but Bitcoin to Mars.
So what does that mean to the moon? Like literally?
The hockey stick. It's just all about the hockey stick.
It looks like a rocket ship. Well,
yeah.
The graph's right there, right? The price just goes all the way up, and it leaves the chart and hits the moon.
I mean, it's like where you go from 0 and 0, 0, 0 to 1.
Next slide.
One of the best memes in the space.
This is a meme-powered coin, essentially.
So I'm here because Jackson Palmer couldn't make it. The guy who created Dogecoin, and Lilu Bitcoin Multipass is she's indicative of what my thoughts about Dogecoin are.
Did you use Dogecoin to buy your daughter?
No, she's called Bitcoin for a reason.
Oh, of course, sorry. So Dogecoin was really fun. Crypto before that had been really cypherpunky, where all these libertarians were like, we put like covers over our laptops, and we're like,
Bitcoin's serious business.
Bitcoin's serious. Yeah. Dogecoin was fun.
Yeah, I mean, once people started talking about Bitcoin, of course we were gonna go the route of Dogecoin.
Well, Doge existed before Dogecoin.
Yeah, Doge is a meme, a really popular, funny one. It's one of my favorite memes. That's why I like it. But Dogecoin was really fun because they moved the decimal really far. So there's only 21 million Bitcoin, but I think there's 100 billion Dogecoins. So everyone felt really wealthy. They're like, man, I got a million Dogecoins.
And it has inflation too, so it was just endless, because there's a bug in it.
Oh, there was a bug in it?
There's supposed to be a cap, but it'll keep mining anyway. And they're like, we can fix it, but it seems fine.
Jackson really originally made it as a joke.
Yeah. It was criticism against Bitcoin itself, and how serious it was.
Yeah, it was a play on how serious Bitcoin was and how unserious or non-serious this was.
I mean, the poor guy still thinks it's a joke, and it totally is. But like, as far as I understand, at least a few months ago, in terms of transaction volume, people were actually legitimately using Dogecoin to buy goods and services.
There's more.
Does anyone know the market cap of Dogecoin? Since you look it up real quick, I don't know off the top of my head.
630 or something like that.
6 billion?
630 million.
600 million?
630 million.
Yeah.
And I think there's more Dogecoin transactions than Bitcoin Cash.
Oh yeah.
And it has had no active development. Not really.
Not in 2 years.
In 2 years.
They don't commit 2
There's some
years.
community development wallets, but they told the joke they wanted to tell. But they did a lot of big things. They're sending a gold Dogecoin to the moon in 2019. They funded the Jamaican bobsled team, which is that's the funniest team they could have funded.
That was good. That was funny.
I think it's going to be amazing when we become a spacefaring society, and our main method of actually getting to becoming a spacefaring society is because of Doge.
To the moon.
And they also funded a NASCAR, which my dad was like, "What's this Dogecoin thing?" He never knew what I was doing with my time, and I said, "Well, there's a Dogecoin car."
How could you not like Doge? It's a cute dog. It looks funny.
And who would have thought to do NASCAR bobsled team?
It speaks to the power of narratives and memes in crypto. I mean, we all have this shared illusion that Bitcoin has value, or any of these cryptocurrencies have value. And at least this one was funny and fun.
And has quite a lot of value.
Yeah, as a comedic thing, but honestly, like, it also kind of threw us under the bus for a little while, because everyone was like, "Oh, Dogecoin's out," and like the rest of society was like, "You weirdos! Like, what is wrong with all these Bitcoin people?"
It also challenged us to think about like what is money. Like money is this shared story between everyone, and if Dogecoin can be worth something, then maybe that's not silly. If people all decide it's something they want to buy and use.
Yeah, I had friends at the time, they didn't know anything about Bitcoin, and I suggested they just get Dogecoin first, because it was more fun and playful, and the wallet had a dog on it.
Did any of those people transition to like real crypto?
A couple moved to other coins, yes.
Okay, cool.
Dogecoin maximalism?
Well, I heard like shitcoin maximalism, I've heard that. I do know a Dogecoin maximalist, yeah.
Jackson?
I think he goes by Dogecoin Musk on Twitter. On Twitter, Dogecoin. Sabotage Beats. He was actually DJ at our holiday party last year. Dogecoin Musk. All right. This I don't know if this is really Bitcoin specific, but yeah.
Well, I think this is crypto specific.
Yeah.
Like, you're under a constant barrage from your family, your friends,
Fear,
your coworkers.
What's the stand?
Fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Yeah.
That this is stupid. I can't believe you put your money into. You would take your hard-earned dollars, those good old greenbacks, dirty, dirty fiat money, and put it into something that's silly magic internet money.
You can buy Budweiser with those dollars. You can't buy Budweiser with Bitcoin.
Yes, sir. and so FUD represented. I mean, it was a constant barrage, and there's a funny website called Bitcoin Obituaries, where it's all the different news headlines that claim Bitcoin is dead. And they've been recording this since like 2011, or 2010 maybe. It's pretty funny because since something so new and so different challenges the status quo, people's first reaction, and that being manifested in news articles, is typically negative. And so all that fear, all that uncertainty, and all that doubt, as an early hodler, you had to really believe in this, because no one was going to tell you that you were right. Everyone was telling you that you were wrong.
If someone like walks up to you today and you ask them what they do for a living, and they say they're a Bitcoin investor, they got a lot of Bitcoin, that has a very different tone than if they had said that a couple of years ago.
Actually, my dad's a CPA, and he was so worried that I got involved in some sort of drug cartel sort of shit. Because, all he had read in the news headlines was that it was used for money laundering and drugs. And I'm like, no, it's a protocol, it's apolitical. It was hard for people to really conceptualize what it was for.
The other side of FUD is FOMO.
Yeah, so the FOMO side of life is when everyone believes that they have missed out on a great opportunity. And in the beginning, I thought to myself, gosh, I can't believe I missed out on Ethereum. And then as time rolled on, I'm kind of glad I missed out on the crypto ATMs and stuff. But with the ICOs, like, yeah, you at some point you start to think to yourself, you don't have enough time to actually like evaluate everything. When you're working with your own personal capital, it becomes like really annoying to like try to put capital into the system, and like there's all these rules and regulations and all this bullshit. And the FOMO like becomes super real, like super quickly.
And you're fighting this constant state of FUD and FOMO. Mm-hmm. Fear and greed. And that's what rules markets.
One side of the story is saying it's really stupid. So you got the articles, the teenage Bitcoin millionaire.
Oh yeah.
John Oliver piece that we had the screenshot for also is quite good. I recommend watching it.
I had about 15 people hit me up about Office Dan when that came out. My name's Dan, so they were like, yeah. It's you're constantly in that state, and that's what these markets represent. And right now, you're going through the kind of the FUD cycle, or the fear cycle, which is challenging the FOMO on the way up, where you're like, man, I should have put everything into it, and now you're like, oh, thank God I did it. I hope that's the case.
So Dan, when FUD and FOMO are getting me down, what's the solution? What do I do?
You got HODL. I mean, HODL is the most critical meme of crypto, which amidst all that FUD, amidst all that FOMO.
One thing you take away today is what is HODL. How important it is. It's not just a meme, it's life.
Now, it is not.
It's a lifestyle.
It is not hold on for dear life. It started a long time ago, and it was a guy who had gotten wasted. And I believe he went to the Bitcoin talk forums or Reddit. I forget.
He got drunk, he gave financial advice.
Yeah, he got drunk and he was like, you know what?
After a big dip, yeah?
It was the December 2013 run up. He was going through that cycle, which is, he's on the downturn, which you guys are feeling right now. And he was like, okay, all you smart, and he's drunk, by the way, so you guys should go read it. It's kind of funny, he kind of rambles. But he's essentially saying, all you smart people, you can buy low, sell high. He's like, I'm shitty. I'm shitty at trading. I buy high and I sell low. I'm terrible at this. I'm just going to buy and hodl. And he basically reiterates, I'm going to buy and hodl throughout that. And the original time he typed it, I think the first time he types hodl, he misspells it. And that's why it's typed hodl. And the rest of the time it actually says hold. Yeah. So he misspelled it because he was drunk.
So what Dan forgot to do today is actually wear his t-shirt. Because Dan's last name is Held. And what did Dan do? He held.
I held. I wore it on Friday when I saw Simone, but I forgot to wear it today.
Well, I saw your Twitter handle is Dan Heddle.
I became the meme.
Can't wait to talk about you 5 years from now.
I'll be holding the whole time.
Yeah, you will have pedaled.
I will have pedaled, I will hodl.
So yeah, you don't know what's going on, crazy prices and the weird stuff. Just sit on your coins and learn more.
But before entering any investment, come up with an investment thesis. Why am I buying this? Whether it be real estate, stocks, bonds, or crypto. Why am I buying this, and why do I think it'll appreciate from the price today? And stick to an investment thesis. Don't be worried about the FUD. Don't be worried about the FOMO. Choose an entry price or choose an area where you want to enter, hold it for a certain amount of time, and then exit at a certain amount you've already kind of pre-set aside in your mind. Otherwise, the markets will go up, you'll continue to hodl, and if you don't have a price that you've selected to get out, or if you don't have a price you selected to get in, you're going to be kind of wrecked by the markets.
Yeah, there's investment advice is always like, don't invest more in anything that you are okay losing outright. And people forgot that when they started mortgaging their houses and shit. And I only know one person for whom that worked out, because he sold his house in 2010 and purchased. And so but other than that, always, no matter what kind of investment it is, invest only as much as you are comfortable losing.
Because we all want that Lambo.
Do you have any indication what amount of asset you can buy BTC?
Like what percentage of your portfolio it should be?
Oh, with crypto?
Yeah.
Oh, I can actually not answer that question because I am an investment manager.
It's based on your risk tolerance and your age as well. The younger people can typically be more risky because if you lost it all, you could earn it back later.
But on average, right, they say you should have 60% stock, 40% bond, and all that.
Treat it the same as any high-risk investment. There's a lot of advice out there, even from 2% to 5% to 10% or 1%. There's probably a lot of stuff written about how to handle high-risk investments, and I read that and just kind of classify Bitcoin as a high-risk investment.
For me personally, the vast majority of what I invest is crypto. For personal
So the
use.
total 100% of the asset is in crypto?
And gold. But I don't believe in real estate.
You have to ask yourself, what's your risk portfolio? How risky do you consider all of this to be?
Typically, they say 5% of the asset You should have it over there. It creates a diversification. And also,
These kind of numbers I heard around, but yeah, it's probably not necessarily sound.
Yeah, I mean, like, it just really just depends. I mean, it depends on what kind of, like, what your portfolio looks like, how much you're actually looking to invest over the year. Like,
stocks, bonds, crypto, just kind of put it in that pie chart, put it in that.
And we're doing that because we want to get a Lambo.
You want to get a Lambo?
That's the whole point of this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got a Lambo slide. We got a Lambo on the moon. That's where you want to go.
Oh, God.
We're driving Lambos on the moon.
I want a Starship, but, like, okay, Lambos are cool, too.
Well, and GoinDaddy's not the only game in town anymore when it comes to musicians. We have Team Huddle, and their song all about Lambo Land, it's called.
I want that Countach, the old Lambo, retro.
So Lambo, yeah, what this kind of encompasses, it's a meme that encompasses a lot of things, which kind of means...
Well, the crypto space is flashy, and the money's earned so quickly that I think Lambo represents that kind of flashy, make money quick culture.
It just means I got a lot of money, so I can buy Lambo.
It's like a BTC Lambo measurement index.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ari was just saying that there's a website that shows like how many Lambos for one Bitcoin is, or how many Bitcoin one Lambo is.
Lambo is a unit of account.
Yeah. So there are people maybe aren't necessarily actually going out and buying Lambos when you hear this. Maybe that's something confusing to know. It's more just like the idea that they're buying something, and like, it had to be a thing. So they just pick Lamborghinis, and a lot of Lamborghinis have been bought, of course, in pursuit of that meme. But it's just more the idea that you could buy a Lambo, and then maybe buying a house or something else. Yeah. Next. Yeah.
But getting a Lambo is hard to do, especially in a downturn. Yeah.
Especially when you put more money than you can actually afford to lose into an
People
investment.
take loans out and Bitcoin with them.
As John Oliver says, be crayful. Be very, very careful. Be crayful. Crayful gang. The HODL gang. But yeah, not everyone has to get a Lambo. Getting the Civic's fine. Just to each their own. Don't be too risky. Don't
You made enough
gamble with
money
what
in
you
a
can't
Civic.
afford.
That's impressive. That's good. Yeah, good trade. So your question about how much to put into Bitcoin, I'm just repeating if the live stream didn't hear it. It is very valid because this is real money. It's real risk, and you don't want to make money by Lambo.
We just moved to California, and we paid the house total from the BTC.
To the moon.
$100,000 in August.
For the live stream, we paid off his house in
End of the
Bitcoin.
year, it was $500,000.
So for you, your Lambo is your home.
Get out from there.
You get a Lambo.
Don't buy that car. Pay back the house.
Yep.
The house, yeah. Pay off your loans, pay off your debt before you go buy pretty things.
So my first 50% down payment came from the appreciation of the Apple stock. The last 50% came from the BTC.
You went to the moon. You went to the moon and got a Lambo.
Now I want to ask you, if the ICO fever has gone down, or is there still an opportunity to raise capital?
So remember we were talking about before the reason that ICOs came into fruition. It's kind of gone the other direction, and to me, like the most successful raises that are happening are ones that are not ICOing right off the bat and are actually raising capital from long-standing institutional investment houses, venture capitalists.
VCs are returning people's calls now when it comes to crypto because once they started the ICO craze in the first place, they couldn't raise VC money. Yeah, but you're seeing that.
Oh yeah, we flew off the deep end, man. Like we started a whole digital assets fund just to capture that
Every
value.
ICO has to go to the SEC.
ICOs, yeah. I believe so. You know what? I'm not the right person to actually answer that because I haven't actually invested in an ICO proper. I do pre-sale, private investments in
That's where
the
a lot of
space.
this has changed too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something maybe important to know. You're not seeing as many ICOs anymore.
We can go down that rabbit hole for a while.
Yeah. They're still happening, but it's VCs are buying them up before they go public.
Mainly be careful with any investment, especially high-risk investments. And that's where we get the classic Bitcoin.
God.
I can't do it justice. His voice is so-
I don't want to have the video going because it's already way over time anyway.
Travis,
So
we're gonna
Google
do
it. Definitely. I mean, I have a quick dad fight. You're pretty good. But you have to look this guy up. There's a ton of memes around it.
So BitConnect was a multi-billion dollar cryptocurrency that basically went to zero.
It was a Ponzi scheme. Is that accurate or
Yeah,
something like that?
accurate. Yeah.
In 2017,
Yeah.
In 2014, I started teaching about Bitcoin. I probably done over 300 hours of lectures, just in cryptocurrency, blockchains, and all that stuff. I remember I had a slide where Russia was Ukraine at that time, and somebody from Ukraine, you guys remember that? Somebody from Ukraine was holding the QR code that you could send Bitcoin to that person over there. I just wonder, I feel like, where is the community going? You know, we should be helping third world countries out. Why are we talking about that? It's like, it's not difficult to get.
Yeah, I guess there's the good side and the bad sides of the community, right?
What happened to this helping the rest of the world? And this is what Bitcoin was originally made for.
And that's why we
That's
started
kind of
with
what we
early
wanted to
history.
cover today, yeah.
Yeah,
You can see the tones change. In the beginning, it's open source, it's ideals, it's big ideas.
So this is kind of like the thing that's like the needle that drives people like me and Dan and Travis to like the edge of like reason, is because we kind of came into this ecosystem wanting to like create real change. Back in the day, we used to drive down the financial district and we would see like U.S. Bank, Wells Fargo, like all these like huge buildings. And we would be like, one day we shall topple these buildings to the ground. Not even actually considering that we would house ourselves in these buildings because we were like decentralization, like these trustless networks, like that's where it's actually at. And one of the reasons I kind of dropped out of the ecosystem for a while was because I was sick and tired of seeing, sorry if there's anyone who identifies as a crypto bro in the crowd, but like it was just like what was happening in the startup ecosphere. The crypto bros came into the ecosystem in the cryptocurrency world, and all of a sudden it was all about raising these like 300 million, 250 million, like $1 billion, $4 billion ICOs, and it's painful because you know that this is just capitalism and it's not actually thinking about what we're doing to better the world.
And to your point, the early hodlers were the revolutionaries. We came here to build a new financial system without permission, without anyone's permission.
It was ideologically driven more than money.
It was very ideologically driven around libertarian ideology, and that's why we wanted to cover some of this today, because not a lot of people know that's how this originated. It originated in the middle of the financial crisis to solve a purpose around giving people a vote out of the system.
I mean, like what most people don't even know is that back in 2011 and 12, the vast majority of us who were actually working in this ecosystem and who had our names up there, we were risking jail time every single day. And like we believed in what we were doing for the betterment of society because somehow along the way, like society failed us or we saw the failure around us. And so, I really think that that really speaks to where the ecosystem actually came from.
They just sound like stories now, but when people say like, oh, I was afraid I was going to get arrested, that was a very real, ever-present concern in a lot of people's minds.
You didn't want to be the scapegoat. They would put you up and they go, hey, this is what happens when you trade a digital currency that's not regulated. We weren't sure.
This was not like a conspiracy theory, this was standard belief.
It was pretty scary. I mean, we didn't know what was going to happen.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's important to kind of remember what the original culture and ideology are built upon. Obviously, people are bringing in new things and they have new purposes and things they want to do with it. And you need to find that thing. And hopefully, because this slide we're getting to now is kind of like what did go wrong, and it's like the crypto bros, it's the money.
So, is this the next? Okay, so right now we're at the time in. It happens every couple of years, and it's really, to me, in my mind, fantastic. Because, as I've said before, it separates the wheat from the chaff. And what we see is people exiting the ecosystem who just frankly don't belong here. People who, are in it for, the gains, Like, I don't really care about those people at all. The people who are in it to actually create technology, who want to create long-standing businesses that are actually solving, problems and bottlenecks in the ecosystem, and the people who actually have an eye towards creating good in the world. Those are the people that stick around during these downturns and who are actually creating things in a bear market.
And that's where you see, the Bitcoin community is so intense because they've survived. They're the hodlers who hodled through all of that and survived.
We hodled in caves.
We huddled around after ate ramen noodles for years, and we weren't sure when it was coming back.
Yeah.
Could have taken a decade. And so we were, I think it's important to remember, these are the times, like Simone said, these are the times where you go build. These are the times where you hodl and refocus your energies on doing something good or doing something great for society in terms of building great products or helping push forward different things that need to be told, like narratives or stories about how cryptocurrency works.
So yeah, thanks so much for coming out to this event, because that's an example of it. When Bitcoin was hitting 20K, we turning 50 people away at the door. We'd have 150 people in the building. That's the max, fire marshal. And 50 people at the door, we had to say, go home, watch the live stream. It was absolutely insane. And the price has gone down, and it looks like 40 people here today, and 50. So you've come out. You're still paying attention. You're still a part of it. And that's really important. I always love applauding myself too. Yeah, let's do questions, George.
So I gotta get out of here, but just real quick. One of my favorite memes, I wish one of you guys would have brought this up. Mt. Gox, MTGOX was Magic the Gathering Online.
So Mt. Gox was Magic the Gathering Online Exchange. That's what Mt. Gox stood for. It was originally an exchange for trading freaking Magic cards. Now, Mark Karpelès had taken over the site, and after Mt. Gox lost everyone's Bitcoin, there was a meme that came out that to me was the funniest ever. It was a Magic card of Mark Karpelès, and his power was all players lose all BTC.
Yeah.
Mt. Gox has been successful.
We oftentimes forget that, when it comes down to it, cryptocurrency is actually all about being freaking nerd. You gotta be super nerdy, and all of the stories from way back when are super nerdy before the jocks entered the ecosystem. But I think in the end the nerds always win out. So
all kind of nerds, band nerds, art nerds, computer nerds.
All the nerds.
Poli-sci nerds in the back.
Hey, thanks. This has been awesome. I want to loop back to this earlier notion that you guys discussed around this dream of Bitcoin becoming money, right? And you spoke about it's more expensive than Venmo, UX sucks, right? It's volatile. And that sounds very right. And I was wondering, in terms of where we're going, the thoughts of the panel, do you see actually, as technology evolves, some of these issues maybe outside of Bitcoin being solved? Is there a place for digital currency in the world? Do you see that emerge or not?
So I encourage everyone to read Nick Szabo's Origins of Money, or how money was memed into existence. How did collectibles, shells and beads, how did that transition from a
magic cards,
coins for a pizza? How do you transition from a collectible to a store of value, and then to a medium of exchange and unit of account? And so Bitcoin is on that trajectory to become what we refer to as currency through the transition from collectible to store of value, which is the stage we're going through now. If it does achieve hyper-Bitcoinization, which is absorbing all of the world's fiat, then it becomes the medium of exchange and unit of account. And sort of that trajectory that all other money has followed before this.
But Don, it may take 100 years.
No.
We may not be alive yet.
If you look at adoption,
technology that has a potential, but we need to be careful at what time frame.
If you look at adoption cycles of the internet, microwaves, cell phones, it'll probably be more applicable to that than that of world reserve currencies like the US dollar.
JP Chase is there, Bank of America there. All these guys would not allow these technologies.
They're already creating their own crypto capabilities in order to harness power that cryptocurrency crypto in general, is showcasing. Because, clearly, I mean, like, how many billions of dollars have come into the ecosystem? Is it 20 billion over the last, for ICOs over the last, like, year or something like that? That's an insane amount of money. I mean, like, certainly more than the $400 million total we were transacting with that was sitting dormant in 2011. So yeah, I think that the adoption curve is actually really high.
Yeah, that devastating Mt. Gox hack was $460 million, and now we have ICOs like EOS doing $4 billion, which is one project.
A quick note on why Bitcoin has a 21 million hard cap. A lot of people view that as a bug, not a feature. The 21 million hard cap was brilliant because there is no supply response. When people want gold, a lot of people buy gold. Gold miners go out and mine more gold, increasing the supply. Bitcoin doesn't have that. So what happens is I buy it, price goes up. I tell my friends about it. They buy it, the price goes up. So it has a natural mechanism to incentivize adoption. And we've seen that through these boom and bust cycles. As the boom and bust cycle, as the price goes up and then dips, you see a whole new wave, a 10x wave of individuals coming to the space.
Question, what is each of your opinions about Lightning Network?
I think Lightning Network is a fantastic layer 2 solution for Bitcoin. I don't believe that every transaction should be on-chain because with a scarce resource, like a block size, like every other trade-off in the universe, you have to trade off something for utilizing that block space. And the idea of abstracting 2 transactions to open and close a channel and then have millions of transactions based on that makes a lot of intuitive sense in terms of how the internet stack has been built in terms of layering and also through efficiency.
So if I had been investing in crypto at the time, I probably would have invested early stage based on the people who were involved, like Elizabeth Stark, who I've known for quite a while, and so I would have to say that the probability that the project is actually reasonable and really good is really high.
This event has homework, so we got, Dan, you got to read The Origin of Money by Nick Szabo. I suggest that you go watch Jackson Palmer's YouTube video on the Lightning Network. He does a really great job kind of breaking it down in non-technical terms. Before I saw the video, I had a really hard time explaining it to people. I'm also extremely optimistic. I think, as Dan was saying, it's not the solution for everything, but it's very important for small trend, for coffee. It's really important for coffee.
And if you have FUD, if you feel like there's a lot, if there's fear, uncertainty, and doubt about Lightning, I did a 20 tweet storm that became really popular about a month and a half ago that I would encourage you to read. If you have any more questions, feel free to DM me on Twitter or tweet at me, and happy to jam on it.
And we probably want to wrap the event up because it is gone a little late. So we'll talk as well later. Let's do the last question here with Coin Daddy with the mic. And everybody get a chance to ask a question. No worries. We'll stay in chat. Yeah.
One last key piece of culture that I think we're going to talk about is a little exchange called Cryptsy. And if you guys don't know Cryptsy, Dan, would you like to explain?
We're going to go back to the scams.
So everyone knows Poloniex and Bittrex and Binance. It's got all the best coins, right? Well, there was one before all of those called Cryptsy, run by Big Vern. And Big Vern ran off all the money. And that was in, I think, 2015, right?
Yeah, people are kind of ambiguous if Carpelas and Gox stole money or not, but there's not that kind of ambiguity with Cryptsy.
Big Vern ran away. We haven't heard from him since.
Yeah, Big Vern ran away to China. Nobody's seen or heard of him since. And the server was run in a broom closet in Florida. So he was out doing hookers and blow and just ran away to China forever.
How much did he take?
Well, he took my stuff, so a lot.
Got wrecked.
Yes, and that's why you keep your storage cold and not on an exchange. And I've learned the hard way.
And that's definitely a good lesson to end on. Grab yourself a hardware key, grab yourself a paper wallet. All right. A big thank you to Dan and Simone and everybody come out here and Coin Daddy for performance. This has been a heck of, we definitely went a little long. It's a lot to cover. But yeah, thank you so much.